Kathleen Kennedy just dropped bad news for Obi-Wan. What is happening?
Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another video. We have some information regarding Kathleen Kennedy and her news on the next Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2. And it's not looking too good for us, so let's get right into it. Speaking on Entertainment Weekly's Dagobah Dispatch podcast, the Lucasfilm boss was asked about whether a season 2 is possible.
Of course it's possible. You just need to do it right. All right? Stop filming scenes where Obi is running and there's like a little laser fence in like a little valley or whatever, and he couldn't possibly figure out any way to get around this laser fence, even though he's still a Jedi. He can force jump, force push, force pull, whatever, but he can't get around just laser fence. Whoa.
Always hesitate to say, no, we don't do anything more with Obi-Wan Kenobi, she replied.
Oh, wow. We won't do anything more with Obi-Wan. Well, bro, that is like the weakest answer. Why? Because you messed it up the first time?
Maybe what we end up doing is something that gets incorporated into some of the other stories we're doing, or eventually into a movie. Who knows?
No, I do not want a movie of Obi-Wan running into tiny laser fences and he just loses his mind because he can't get around it. Or little tiny 6-year-olds outrunning adults. I do not want a movie about that.
So, two big things here. The first, of course, being sad that, we won't get probably an Obi-Wan Kenobi season 2. The first season, in my opinion, I loved having Ewan McGregor back. I loved having Hayden back.
Yeah.
Those are my two favorite guys.
Yeah, that part was good. When they were on screen, they acted their butts off.
Probably in the world in terms of acting. But as for their characters, I mean, it doesn't get better than the prequel trilogy, in my opinion. And it was really beautiful to see them return in Star Wars. As for the story and the directing, you guys know how I feel about that. I felt like it just really didn't do them justice and didn't tell the story that I feel like George would have told during this time. As for the directing itself, just wasn't a fan of it. But
bring back the space samurai. All right? The space western. All right? What's wrong with that?
This is kind of like good and bad news. So we won't be getting season 2 most likely, which was weird because the numbers were great, at least for the beginning, the opening premiere. But she does say that maybe we'll end up incorporating Obi-Wan Kenobi into a spin-off show or something like that. So he could show up in, let's say, the Ahsoka show if there's some sort of a flashback, right? So we could maybe not get Obi-Wan, protecting Luke, but we'll get him during the Clone Wars. Maybe we'll see him on Tatooine as well if we go in that era, in that time period, with any of the shows going forwards in terms of a flashback, or if they want to release shows during that time. For example, Andor Season 2. This is a time period before A New Hope where Obi-Wan is still very, of course, prominent and out there and alive. So really they have up until, well, actually, they could make him return as a Force ghost whenever they want. So,
and who knows? Maybe the Force ghost will have Force powers as a Force ghost. Because when it comes to space wizards, these guys can't get anything right. There's no continuity between this movie and that movie and this trilogy and that trilogy and the shows and the animated series and whatever.
Oh, they could do it in the Rey movie. They could do it in really any show that they choose.
Yeah.
We could even have it in the Ahsoka show if they so wish. It just has to be like a proper moment. But personally, I think that we'll get to see him a decent amount going forwards in shows. I don't think, the idea of him showing up in the Ahsoka show is really too far-fetched. I think it's definitely a big possibility, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. Now, the second thing I want to discuss here is...
Yeah, because that little trio of Anakin, Obi, and Ahsoka, that was present in that animated series, the Clone Wars animated series or whatever. So it would only be, I don't know, kind of fitting to... incorporate Obi into Ahsoka, at least maybe like for one episode at least. So like,
is the fact that she says eventually into a movie. What kind of a movie has Obi-Wan Kenobi in it besides maybe the Rey movie where he shows up as a Force ghost? The reason I say that is because of his words to Rey in The Force Awakens, which they had played with the idea, the original idea, that Obi-Wan Kenobi was going to be Rey's father or grandfather.
They played with that idea, and for all we know, that probably could have been a better idea than what happened in the movies that we saw. So, I mean, for them to go back and say that now, I mean, it'd be like ridiculous, even more ridiculous.
Now, if you remember when she grabbed the lightsaber, it said, "These are your first steps." And it was Obi-Wan's voice. It was a mixture of Alec Guinness, Ewan McGregor, and they blended them together. And so it made us all think like, oh, okay, Obi-Wan's around. This is it. This is him.
Mm-hmm.
Which, of course, they changed because of the sequel trilogy's absolutely disastrous writing and cooperation between the directors and the entire team of Disney and Lucasfilm just shitting the bed completely on that.
Oh yeah, those what was it? Episode 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. Those were like horribly written. It was like the first time you see it, like it's like each of the movies is like, this is all right. But then it loses it. Like all those movies lose that magic stuff on more subsequent watches because it's like there's loopholes that you notice at least as an adult or whatever. Like maybe if you're a kid, you don't notice that shit as much. But yeah, like there's a which is ridiculous because there's a lot of other good movies like in the past where like, you know, like no movie's perfect or whatever, but like on subsequent watches of like older movies or whatever, or at least certain older movies, the movies get better. It's a, like Inception or the Batman, Chris Nolan movies or whatever. You know, they're not perfect, but it's like on subsequent watches, it's like, oh, that this scene's calling back to that. This is that, or like on like Fight Club, you know, on subsequent watches of Fight Club, it's like, oh god, that movie gets better and better every time you watch it or whatever. But like on subsequent watches of like was it 7, 8, 9, it's like it gets worse and worse.
Which resulted in this massive divide of the fandom. She goes on to say, but right now, it's still our standalone limited series. We have no plans for expansion right now. I mean, the character of Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of the most important characters in Star Wars, and I think him, Anakin Skywalker, and Luke Skywalker will show up many more times in future Star Wars projects. It just depends on what kind of show they're going to show up in, and also, what is this movie? No, besides the Rey movie, what movie could we be getting? Who knows? Did she just let something slip that maybe we'll get like some prequel trilogy movie or a continuation between episode 3 and 4?
Don't hold your breath because it's not going to be for any veteran Star Wars person. It's going to be for the younger, more modern audience. That's what they're going to aim towards.
Or will there be some project between 4, 5, and 6 that we don't know about where Obi-Wan could show up? Will it be in Andor? Will we get another Rogue One movie, so to speak, maybe a prequel? Who knows what? So that really stuck out to me, the fact that she's saying, hey, maybe a movie. Is this Dave's movie?
Who knows?
It could very well be. You know, it could very well be that Obi-Wan will show up as a Force ghost in Dave Filoni's movie, which takes place a few years after Return of the Jedi, you know, during the time of Ahsoka, Mando, Boba Fett, all this and that. So it is very possible that we do see him in that movie. As for any others, well, they have yet to be announced. So last year, Obi-Wan Kenobi writer and executive producer Joby Harold was asked about the possibility of a second season 2. I'm being asked about it constantly, he said. I've just been thinking about this for so long as a close-ended story that my mind is so focused on this as a sort of limited series that I haven't thought beyond it.
And that's fine to think like that because if you're just told, hey, write, I don't know, 10 episodes or however long Obi-Wan was, write an enclosed story and that's it. You know, there's a book start and a book end and that's it. It's like, okay, that's fine. You know, for them trying to like milk like the Obi-Wan series for like more money and views and ratings or whatever, which I have no idea why they would even think that or whatever. Cause like the season 1 of Obi-Wan was just like, it was bad, but I don't know, man.
He's a great character. They're all amazing characters. Well, yeah, duh. But look, there is no close-ended story here with Obi-Wan. There are continuous stories, as we've seen in the comics, in the Legends books, Legends comics, even the new comics of Obi-Wan on Tatooine, and the very many things that he has to deal with in saving Luke and protecting Luke and the Larses.
Like, if you're gonna make an Obi-Wan season 2, you have to pull from somewhere else. Like, pull from some of the Legends books, pull from the Legends comics or whatever other comics, all right? Because I guarantee you that writing is gonna be light years ahead of whatever you're trying to currently think about. All right, I guarantee it. I haven't read any of that stuff, but I'm just gonna go ahead and go out on a limb and say that stuff is probably better than what you're trying to pull out of your head.
So, whether that be against, crazy Tusken Raiders or, the water tax being thrown on moisture farmers from Jabba's thugs, there's a lot going on there that could have been turned into, a spin-off or something like that. As for what they did with Kenobi, dude, I was really disappointed. Like, there were some
Yeah,
really cool scenes that I enjoyed. Of course, Anakin and Obi-Wan, having that moment together at
the
the
sparring
end,
sesh.
the flashback stuff. Overall, the shaky cam stuff, that in itself was disastrous, took you right out of it. It didn't increase the tension or anything like that the director probably thought it would.
If you want to see shaky cam, I'll go watch like the Bourne series, the Bourne trilogy. All right, it's nonstop shaky cam. All right, it's like just because it works in this movie series doesn't mean it's gonna work in this movie series or whatever. It's like it's crazy.
The overall trajectory and the focus of the show, Riva, so much focus on Riva, just a really trash character, in my opinion, that is interjected into the storyline and put the spotlight on her when it should have been on Obi-Wan and Vader. Now,
Yeah.
her telling Obi-Wan that Vader.
Now, Riva is not necessarily a bad character in like the comics or whatever or the books. It's just how she was portrayed on Obi-Wan it wasn't good. All right. It They tried to shoehorn her in as a a bad guy that we're supposed to care about somehow because what was it? She was like part of that like culling of like the little younglings or whatever. She was like a young a youngling or whatever in that little flashback. And we're supposed to feel bad for her, but a little tiny flashback isn't enough to make me feel bad for someone because it what was it like a minute or two and it's like oh like all of her screen time she's a bad guy, but then it's like they try to justify it as like oh here's this one little minute of like oh she used to be a youngling and then she was like order 66 or whatever. Yeah, it's like okay, that's not enough to like pull my heartstrings, or at least not in that way.
Vader is Anakin and survived and all this and that. Big mistake, in my opinion. I think they should have gone the route of the Legends novel, which I've sourced many times in videos, which has a lot of
Yeah, but they decanonized all that shit.
really interesting information regarding how Obi-Wan found out that Vader exists.
So what would happen if they were to take a large like amount of like inspiration from like any singular like Legends novel, that they decanonized? What would happen to like those like authors or whatever, Like if an author made a book and then all of a sudden they want to make a movie pulling from that book, and then all of a sudden the author's gonna be like, hey, that was in my book first. That was in here first. That's my idea. Like what would happen? Or maybe there is no copyright thing or whatever for that. I don't know.
From the book Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader by James Luceno, released in 2005. This book was released during the time of Revenge of the Sith, which also released in 2005. In my head, that book is canon, and all of this
In the head canon, the fandom head canon.
other stuff is just Disney trying to figure something out to make some money and make some Disney Plus stuff.
And that's what I think is that's like an important point that you should probably take into account if you're like a diehard Star Wars fan. I'm like a casual Star Wars fan, all right? But like I understand like when Kathleen Kennedy took over and she like all of a sudden decanonized all that like that huge backlog of like books, comics and whatever. And then it's like the only things that are canon are the movies and like whatever shows we come out with from now on. Like I think a healthy thing to do is like Star Wars can be like whatever you want it to be. If you want your own head canon to be like this is the story of Luke Skywalker, and that, you can incorporate, some of the movies, some of the books, some of the comics in there, and maybe even some of the books and comics that came after the movies. You can have that as your headcanon if you like that, all right? It doesn't have to be like this is the like official story. This is the official timeline, you know? Because if you're trying to like get everything to be official and officially endorsed by Disney, it's like you're just gonna like upset your mental state that, trying to justify this or that or this is good or that's good. You can have, again, Star Wars can be whatever you want it to be.
But in my opinion, I don't think it's really what George would have intended. They're incorporating things, pulling on our heartstrings like they did with Qui-Gon showing up at the end and all this and that. But
Member berries.
When you really pick it apart and look at it, you're like, let's get rid of the nostalgia. Let's get rid of the fact that, our awesome favorite characters are in here, Anakin and Obi-Wan, Hayden and Ewan are back. Let's take that out and let's really examine, like, what the hell did I just watch? I waited so many years for these guys to return, and we're just focusing on this crappy Inquisitor who really doesn't sell the role. And then we're focusing on all of these weird things that are happening in terms of like the strange decisions that Obi-Wan is making. Like, he's first of all disillusioned with the Force. He's cut himself off. Like, he just doesn't care anymore. And he's like this very docile, afraid person. And it seems to be
Yeah. The docile, afraid portion of Obi-Wan would have been completely fine if we saw that transition happen on screen. All right. But since we didn't see that little transition, all we are met with is like this, like, very fearful, like you said, docile, afraid to use his Force powers, Obi-Wan. All right. Because we didn't see it and they didn't show it. All right. If you were to show like some sort of events, like a singular event or multiple events that, there was like a transitioning of that character becoming that guy in like fear and weakness, that would have been fine. But since we didn't see it, it makes no sense.
Their cookie cutter method. Disney does two things. They cut the dude off who's powerful from the Force, make him weak so that he has some sort of a triumphant return, but his return is no better than he was before, or if anything, he's like dead, like Luke. And it dies in some lame way. Or they just create some father-son relationship and with like a cute little child, and then they think that that's going to garner a lot of views, but eventually that gets old, right? So remember, like, Mandalorian Season 3 really wasn't that big of a hit. It was okay, in my opinion, but it just wasn't anything like the creativity and beauty that was Season 1 and 2.
Yeah.
So I think going forwards, they really need to focus on these proper characters, not have slapstick comedy of lightsabers bouncing, people.
Yeah, Star Wars is not Marvel. Stop trying to make Star Wars like Marvel. Even though, like, slapstick comedy and like action comedy is more like, if you're gonna do action comedy, make it good. Like Jackie Chan is like the epitome of action comedy. All right, if you want to do like some slapstick stuff here and there, that's fine, but you have to like reserve it or whatever. Or like, please don't make Star Wars like Marvel, where nothing is serious. They're cracking jokes like every other sentence. It's like that's what is seemingly going to happen. And I mean, they kind of strayed away from it with Mandalorian Season 1 and 2, which was good, but I don't know. It's just not looking good.
Hitting stormtroopers like this, and then the stormtrooper gets disoriented. Make all the fun you want of stormtroopers, but in some shows they're actually pretty damn good. Like Andor, they were good. They came in there and they looked really legit. They were making shots. They were executing things well. Unlike the previous, I forgot what they were. The previous security company that came in there and just didn't know what the hell they were doing with Cyril, right? The one that Cyril was in charge of, or leading. Obi-Wan with putting Leia in his trench coat, and it's like, how does no one know?
Oh God, that was horrible. Oh my Jesus. The trench coat scene with the tiny legs. Oh my God, I'm just reminded of, like, what was that Michael Myers movie? Austin Powers. That scene with, he's like on top of Mini-Me's shoulders and he's doing that noise. Oh my God. That was terrible, man.
Notice it just all of it was just really comical, and everything, with the thugs trying to capture little Leia and trying to capture Obi-Wan, trying to
Yeah.
capture her.
The running scene. Do not get me started on that stupid running scene in the woods.
It was just, the show was not done, I think, the way that we would have expected it to be done. Sure, there were some very cool moments. How could there not be when you have Darth Vader and Obi-Wan and you have Hayden and...
Oh no, you can have some bad moments between Darth Vader and Obi-Wan. How about Darth Vader is like chasing Obi-Wan throughout the galaxy, and then once he has him like within like sight range, there's like some fire that rises up, and then all of a sudden Vader is just like, I don't want you. Get away from me. Oh, there's fire. Force push the fire out of the way. Ah, I parted the fiery sea, which is cool. I could easily, force pull you to me or whatever. But all more fires in the way. Ah, I ran out of force battery juice power. Shit. Yeah.
And Ewan returning. But at the end of the day, it could have been so much more, and that's what I look at. I'm like a really strict parent. It's like, okay, well, you got a B or a C plus, but you know what? You could have gotten an A plus.
No, dude, that shit was a D. That shit was passing, but just barely.
And that's how I look at Star Wars today, especially now that it's not in the hands of George. I'm very, very protective of it, and I have my own, sort of strict thinking of, well, why didn't we do this? Why didn't we do that? That's silly. Why would we do... So I'm very, very critical at that point. And I think you need to be as a Star Wars fan, especially in my position where I'm commenting on it and I don't just want to consume and repeat everything going on. So anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you think. Do you think we should
be better writers?
Get an Obi-Wan season 2, or we should get some sort of show or him in a movie or continuing in one of the spin-offs that we're going to get? Love to hear what you think. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Until then, remember, the Force will be with you always.
Nice. All right. Star Wars Theory, that was great. Love the video. Love to see it. Passion's still there. Star Wars will always have infinite potential. But, currently it's not looking too good. But, hopefully things get better in the future. But, we'll see. And I loved it. I want to see more videos just like this. So that's pretty much it. That's all I got to say. All right. So later.